Look at a map of the Nevada desert from the 1980s. Amidst the highways, the small mining towns, and the sprawling federal lands, there is a void. A massive, restricted block of topography where the map simply stops. No roads are drawn. No topography is detailed. It is a geographic black hole, a place that officially, legally, and fundamentally did not exist. Yet if you knew exactly where to stand on the jagged peaks of the Tikaboo Valley, and you possessed optics powerful enough to pierce the heat shimmer of the dry lake bed, you would see it. An impossibly long runway stretching across the cracked earth of Groom Lake. Radar installations spinning in absolute silence. Hangars large enough to swallow commercial airliners, their doors sealed tight against the blistering sun. This is the most famous secret on Earth. The undisputed epicenter of global conspiracy, military supremacy, and modern mythology. Area 51. For decades, the United States government played a high-stakes game of semantic gymnastics regarding this patch of dirt. They wouldn't confirm the name. They wouldn't confirm the operations. They would only acknowledge an operating location near Groom Lake. And for a long time, the secrecy was entirely justified. This was the crucible of the Cold War. It was here that the U-2 spy plane was born, a silver ghost designed to fly so high the Soviet Union couldn't even track it, let alone shoot it down. It was here that the A-12 Oxcart tore through the sky at Mach 3, generating sonic booms that echoed across the Mojave like thunder from a clear blue sky. It was the testing ground for radar-evading stealth technology, the birthplace of the F-117 Nighthawk. The people who worked there flew in on unmarked planes from Las Vegas, operating under oaths of silence so strict that they couldn't tell their own spouses where they were going or what they were doing. They were building the machines that kept the world from nuclear annihilation. They were patriots operating in the absolute dark. And for nearly 40 years, the perimeter held. The sensors in the desert dirt, the armed contractors in unmarked white trucks, the intimidating signs warning of lethal force, they all worked. The black site remained black. But a secret of that magnitude, heavily funded and fiercely guarded, creates a vacuum. And human nature abhors a vacuum. Where there are no facts, rumors rush in to fill the space. Strange lights were seen dancing erratically over the mountains. Sonic booms rattled windows in towns hundreds of miles away. The military dismissed them as weather balloons, experimental flares, or swamp gas, excuses so flimsy they practically begged to be disbelieved. The world knew something was happening in the Nevada desert. Something world-breaking. But no one on the outside knew exactly what. Until November of 1989. The dam didn't break with a military press conference or a declassified document dump. It broke on local television, in the glow of cathode ray tubes in living rooms across Las Vegas. A man appeared on KLAS TV, bathed in deep shadow, his voice digitally altered to a low, robotic drone. He was introduced only by the pseudonym Dennis. He wasn't a journalist. He wasn't a politician. He was, he claimed, a scientist, an insider. And the words that came out of his mouth in that shadowed interview would irrevocably alter the trajectory of human history, shattering the mythos of Area 51 and giving birth to a global phenomenon. Dennis didn't talk about stealth fighters or radar jamming. He talked about propulsion systems that defied the laws of physics. He talked about hangar doors camouflaged into the side of a mountain. He talked about vehicles not built by human hands. The clock was completely broken on what we thought we knew. The veil was tearing, and the man in the shadows was about to step into the light. The shadow didn't last long. Within months, the distortion was removed, the silhouette was replaced by a face, and Dennis revealed his true identity to the world. His name was Bob Lazar. He didn't look like a raving lunatic. He didn't sound like a conspiracy theorist desperately seeking attention. He was a bespectacled, articulate, slightly nervous man who spoke with the dry, methodical cadence of a physicist. He possessed a terrifyingly calm demeanor when discussing the impossible. And his story, delivered to investigative journalist George Knapp, was so densely packed with specific, verifiable-sounding technical details that it forced the world to stop and listen. Lazar claimed that his journey into the darkest corner of the military-industrial complex began with a referral from Dr. Edward Teller, the legendary and controversial physicist known as the father of the hydrogen bomb. Lazar, who possessed an eclectic background involving jet-powered cars and a stint at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, was exactly the kind of unorthodox mind the black-budget world occasionally absorbed. He was interviewed, vetted, and eventually hired by a defense contractor. But he wasn't sent to Area 51. Not exactly. According to Lazar, Groom Lake was the administrative hub, the testing ground for conventional, albeit highly classified, terrestrial aircraft. His actual destination was somewhere far more secretive. He described flying into Groom Lake on the infamous Janet flights, the unmarked white Boeing 737s, with the single red stripe that shuttled workers from McCarran International Airport. But upon landing at Area 51, his journey wasn't over. He boarded a bus with blacked-out windows. The bus drove south, away from the Groom Lake facility, down a heavily guarded, unpaved dirt road for about 15 miles. The destination was a completely different dry lake bed, Papoose Lake. Here, nestled into the side of the mountain, was a facility so deeply classified that even the base commander at Area 51 allegedly didn't have full clearance for it. Lazar called it S-4. There were no sprawling runways or massive administrative buildings. Instead, the facility was literally carved into the rock face. 9 hangar doors, textured and painted to perfectly mimic the slope of the desert mountain. From the air, or from any distance, S-4 was entirely invisible. It was a phantom facility, a maximum security vault designed to hold the most sensitive hardware in the history of mankind. When Lazar was first brought inside, he was subjected to a battery of psychological tests, intense security briefings, and threats of federal prison should he ever breach his non-disclosure agreement. He was given clearances that supposedly transcended the standard top-secret classifications. He was told he was joining a reverse engineering program. The goal, to understand and replicate advanced propulsion technology. Initially, Lazar assumed he was looking at some highly exotic, highly experimental United States technology. Perhaps a breakthrough in nuclear propulsion or a radical new aeronautic design meant to leapfrog Soviet capabilities. He was handed briefing folders, blue binders filled with overview reports on the project. But as he read through the materials, the reality of his situation began to set in. The technical schematics didn't make sense. The metallurgical reports detailed materials that did not exist on the periodic table. And the photographs in the files showed vehicles that entirely lacked wings, exhaust ports, or any conventional flight surfaces. Then he was taken onto the hangar floor. And he saw it with his own eyes. It sat in the center of the bay, resting on its own belly without landing gear. It was flawlessly smooth, constructed of a metallic substance that looked like brushed stainless steel, but felt cold and unyielding in a way no earthly metal did. It was about 52 feet in diameter, a classic disc shape, rising to a gentle dome in the center. There were no seams, no rivets, no welding marks, no wiring. The entire craft appeared to have been injection molded from a single continuous piece of material. Lazar would later refer to this specific craft as the sports model. It was one of 9 distinct vehicles housed at the S-4 facility. According to his account, some of the other craft looked entirely different. One resembled a gelatinous floating jello mold, another looked like a flat-top hat, and one appeared to have been heavily damaged by some sort of projectile. But the sports model was pristine, intact, and it was Lazar's primary assignment. His job was to figure out how it worked. Specifically, his team was tasked with reverse engineering the propulsion system. And this is where Lazar's testimony pivoted from a standard UFO sighting into a masterclass of bizarre, hyper-specific theoretical physics. This wasn't a story about flashing lights in the sky. This was a story about nuts, bolts, and anti-gravity. When Lazar looked inside the craft, the interior was just as alien as the exterior. There were no control panels as we understand them. No joysticks, no throttles, no digital displays, no wires connecting components. Everything was scaled down, as if built for occupants significantly shorter than the average human. But the most staggering revelation was the power source. Lazar described a small dome-like reactor positioned in the center of the craft. It was about the size of a basketball. When activated, it didn't burn fuel. It didn't rely on chemical combustion or jet turbines. It operated on a principle of physics that human science had not yet reached. The reactor, Lazar claimed, was fueled by a stable isotope of a super-heavy element. He called it element 115. At the time of his interview in 1989, element 115 did not exist in any textbook. It was entirely theoretical. On Earth, we had only synthesized elements up into the low 100s, and those were violently unstable, existing for mere fractions of a second before decaying in particle accelerators. But Lazar claimed that the beings who built the sports model had access to an island of stability in the periodic table, a stable, heavy isotope that could be machined and utilized as a physical fuel source. He described it as a dull orange metal, incredibly heavy, which S-4 had stockpiled in small triangular wedges. The reactor's function was mind-bending. According to Lazar, when bombarded with protons within the reactor core, element 115 would transmute briefly into element 116, which immediately decayed. This decay process released a specific, highly unusual byproduct, antimatter. The antimatter was then channeled into a tuned tube where it reacted with a gas, resulting in total annihilation. But the thermal energy from this antimatter annihilation wasn't the point. The heat was converted into massive electrical energy via a near 100% efficient thermoelectric generator. The true prize, the actual method of propulsion, was something else entirely. The reaction produced a strong nuclear force field. It generated an actual gravity wave. This is the hook that caught the attention of the world. Lazar wasn't saying the craft pushed air backward to move forward. He was saying the craft manipulated the very fabric of space-time. The gravity wave generated by the reactor was channeled through the hull of the ship to 3 massive gravity emitters located on the underside of the craft. These emitters could be independently articulated, acting like thrusters. But they didn't push. They pulled. Lazar explained it using a visual analogy. Imagine space-time as a rubber sheet. If you want to move from point A to point B, you can travel across the surface of the sheet. That's conventional travel. It takes time, it takes fuel, and you are limited by the speed of light. But the sports model didn't travel linearly. By intensifying the gravitational field and focusing the 3 emitters on a single distant point, the craft literally pulled that point in space toward itself. It folded the rubber sheet. The craft then shifted into the folded space, and when the gravity field was turned off, space-time snapped back into its original shape. The craft hadn't moved through space. Space had moved around the craft. This explained everything. It explained how the craft could execute right-angle turns at thousands of miles per hour without turning the occupants into liquid. Because the craft was enveloped in its own gravitational envelope, it was completely isolated from the inertia of the outside universe. Inside the field, there were no g-forces. You could accelerate to 1,000,000 miles an hour in a split second, and you wouldn't spill a drop of coffee. It explained why the craft operated in total silence. It was moving within a vacuum of its own creation, pushing the atmosphere out of the way before it even made contact. And it explained the bizarre, glowing halos often reported around these objects. The immense gravitational field was actually bending light around the craft, causing it to distort, glow, or even turn invisible depending on the power output. Lazar claimed he witnessed a demonstration. On the desert floor of Papoose Lake, he watched as the sports model powered up. It was silent. A blue glow emanated from the bottom, accompanied by a high-voltage corona discharge. And then, the massive, impossibly heavy machine simply lifted off the ground. It floated. It broke its tether to the Earth effortlessly, defying the fundamental force that binds everything on this planet. He knew right then that human history was obsolete. He knew that the fossil fuel industry, global aerodynamics, and classical physics were effectively dead. The answers to limitless clean energy, interstellar travel, and the manipulation of gravity were sitting in a camouflaged hangar in Nevada, locked away by the military. And the military was failing. According to Lazar, the reverse engineering program was a disaster. They were treating the craft like puzzle boxes, blindly trying to take them apart without understanding the foundational science of how they were built. It was, in his words, like handing a nuclear submarine to a medieval blacksmith. They had the hardware, but they lacked the conceptual framework to do anything with it. Scientists had died in previous attempts to cut into the reactors. Progress was stalled. The frustration inside S-4 was immense. It was this frustration, combined with an increasing sense of paranoia, that led to Lazar's downfall. The deeper Lazar got into the S-4 program, the more suffocating the atmosphere became. He felt he was being watched, followed, and monitored. His phone lines clicked with the distinct sound of wiretaps. The security protocols became increasingly aggressive. The final straw came when he realized he was being investigated for marital infidelity, a massive security risk in the eyes of the black-budget handlers. Fearing for his life and his freedom, Lazar did the unthinkable. He decided to use the secrecy against itself. He knew the schedule of the flight tests. He knew when they were going to power up the sports model and take it for brief, low-altitude flights over the Papoose Lake Basin. He gathered a small group of friends, including Gene Huff and John Lear, a pilot with deep connections to the intelligence community. Under the cover of darkness, he drove them out to the perimeter of the restricted zone, to a vantage point in the Tikaboo Valley. He told them where to look, and exactly on schedule they saw it. A bright glowing object lifting silently from the distant mountains, performing erratic, impossible maneuvers before dropping back down. They did it 3 times. On the 3rd attempt, they were caught. Security forces descended on them. The perimeter had been breached. Though they weren't on the base proper, their presence, combined with Lazar's inside knowledge, was a catastrophic leak. Lazar was detained, interrogated, and stripped of his clearance. His employment was terminated, and he was violently threatened. The message was clear. Disappear, shut your mouth, or you will vanish into the desert. Instead of hiding, Lazar went to the press. He reasoned that going public was his only insurance policy. If he died in a mysterious car crash or vanished overnight, it would only validate his claims. He sat down with George Knapp, the cameras rolled, and the S-4 story detonated across the globe. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. The military, naturally, denied everything. They denied S-4 existed. They denied Bob Lazar had ever worked for them. They denied he had ever been employed at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And this is where the story shifts from a science fiction thriller into a geopolitical espionage puzzle. When journalists and researchers tried to verify Lazar's background, they hit a brick wall. Lazar claimed to possess degrees from MIT and Caltech. Yet both institutions had 0 record of his attendance. No transcripts, no yearbooks, no professors who remembered him. The hospital where he claimed to have been born had no birth certificate. It was as if someone had gone into the mainframes of the United States and hit delete. His past was systematically wiped. Skeptics immediately seized on this. They argued that Lazar was a brilliant but deeply flawed con artist, a fraud who used his peripheral knowledge of physics to spin a masterful yarn. If he didn't go to MIT, if he didn't go to Caltech, then he wasn't a physicist, and everything else was a lie. But the deletion of Bob Lazar wasn't perfect. There were fragments left behind, ghost data that the sweepers missed. Investigative journalists found an old phone directory from the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And right there, listed among the elite scientists working at one of the premier nuclear research facilities in the world, was Robert Lazar. Not only that, but a local newspaper article from the early 1980s profiled Lazar and his jet-powered Honda, explicitly stating his occupation as a physicist at Los Alamos. When pushed, Los Alamos finally admitted he had worked there, but claimed he was a lowly contractor, a technician, not a senior physicist. The narrative was constantly shifting. Then came the raid. Decades after his initial whistleblowing, Lazar's business, United Nuclear, a scientific supply company, was suddenly raided by the FBI. Agents swarmed the building, searching for paperwork, computers, and specifically, any trace of dangerous materials. Lazar maintained they were looking for something else. He claimed that before he left S-4, he had managed to smuggle out a tiny stabilized sample of element 115, a physical piece of the reactor fuel. He had hidden it, a trump card waiting to be played. The raid, he believed, was a desperate, heavy-handed attempt by the government to recover the stolen technology before it could be analyzed by independent scientists. Whether the sample exists or not, The impact of Bob Lazar's testimony is undeniable. He permanently altered the cultural landscape. Before Lazar, Area 51 was just a dark spot on a map, a footnote in aviation history. After Lazar, it became the global symbol of government cover-ups. He introduced the terms Element 115, S-4, and reverse engineering into the modern lexicon. And as the decades have passed, strange vindications have emerged. In 2003, Russian and American scientists successfully synthesized element 115 in a laboratory. They named it moscovium. While the synthesized version was highly unstable and decayed instantly, it proved that the element Lazar described 14 years prior actually existed in the realm of physics. Furthermore, modern disclosures by the Pentagon, the release of the Tic Tac UFO videos by Navy pilots, and the admission of advanced aerospace threat identification programs have mirrored Lazar's descriptions of gravity-defying silent craft with chilling accuracy. The way the Navy pilots described the movement of these modern UAPs, dropping from 80,000 feet to sea level in seconds without sonic booms, rotating without flight surfaces, is exactly how Bob Lazar described the sports model in 1989. The man who was called a lunatic, a fraud, and a liar sat in front of a camera 30 years ago and outlined the exact flight dynamics of vehicles the United States military is only now admitting are real. The story of S-4 remains locked in the desert. The camouflaged doors at Papoose Lake, if they exist, remain closed. But the clock is broken. The whistle was blown. And the echo of Bob Lazar's voice still bounces off the canyon walls of Nevada, waiting for the day the rest of the world finally catches up to the truth.